Hello viewers, you're watching the Cross Moda channel. For several decades, the Wankel engine, also known as the Rotary engine, paradoxically was both the best and worst alternative to the good old gasoline piston engine with its reciprocating motion. The concept of the Rotary engine showed great promise from the moment it appeared in the 1950s, but in the end, this type of engine did not live up to the engineers' expectations. And that's exactly why these days, seeing a vehicle with a rotary engine on the road is a real stroke of luck. However, let's go back to the 1960s and 1970s. To many engineers, the rotary engine seems like a great alternative to the piston engine, and its drawbacks appear completely insignificant and easily solvable. That era gave the world a number of motorcycles with such a power unit, and one of them in the 70s was a Dutch two-rotor. I want to talk about this motorcycle and its history in this episode. Enjoy watching. The rotary internal combustion engine was an intriguing design that many engineers hoped for in the mid-20th century. And indeed, such a unit has a number of advantages. It is structurally simpler than a piston engine. There are fewer moving parts in the rotor, and overall, there are fewer parts. Its specific power per working volume is higher, with lower friction losses. Plus, the unit is very compact, ideal. However, the disadvantages of this design, high fuel and oil consumption, rapid wear of the seals, and expensive maintenance, have negated all its advantages. The most popular among rotary motorcycles was the Suzuki Re-V Severny, and there was also the rather awkward Hercules W2000 in all. Norton's British team excelled at making rotary motorcycles in the 80s and 90s, and in the Soviet Union, work on creating prototypes of heavy motorcycles with this engine was carried out for a long time, including for escorting top officials. One of this lineup of motorcycles was the Dutch Veen OCR, probably the best rotary motorcycle of the 70s. Henk van Wijn was a Dutch importer of Kreidler two-stroke motorcycles and prepared them for Grand Prix races in the 50cc class. If the name Kreidler doesn't ring a bell, here's a hint for a story about these crazy 50cc bikes that could reach speeds of up to 210 kilometers per hour. Van Wijn was the top Kreidler importer in the Netherlands, selling over 100,000 motorcycles and mopeds by 1971. The profits from his successful commercial activities allowed him to finance the racing program, and in turn, sporting achievements served as excellent advertising for his business. Van Wijn wanted success in the major motorcycle market and aimed to create something exclusive, turning his attention to the Wankel engine, which several car and motorcycle makers were experimenting with at the time. Thus, in the early 70s, the OCR project was born. OCR, by the way, stands for oil-cooled rotors, which literally means rotors with oil cooling. The initial prototype used a Moto Goods EVCM frame with a Mazda rotary engine. After it was well received, development started on a more advanced production model. In the late 1960s, NSU and Citroën partnered to make engines in Luxembourg as co-motor. The goal of this collaboration was to create a two-rotor, liquid-cooled engine to be installed in the Citroën GS car. The unit, introduced in 1973, had a displacement of 996 cubic centimeters and produced about 100 horsepower at maximum output. The engine had a number of improvements compared to the NSU and Mazda engines, and it was this power unit that Henk van Veen set his sights on and began purchasing them. The U-motor OCR underwent a restyling. A new frame was built around the rotor from the co-motor, and the engine was paired with a transmission developed by Porsche. The motorcycle's exterior had top-quality finishes, refined lines, and careful attention to every detail. In general, Henk van Veen set high goals for himself. He wanted to create not only a powerful and fast motorcycle, but also a machine that was perfect in terms of engineering, design, and build quality. The two-rotor OCR engine had a displacement of 996 cubic centimeters, but these aren't quite the same cubic centimeters as in a piston engine. According to the rules of the Motorcycle Federation, the ratio of the displacement of a rotary engine to a piston engine is set at 1 to 1.7, meaning that a 1-liter rotary engine is equivalent to a 1.7-liter piston engine. Bi-rotor boasted a power output of 100.4 horsepower at 6,500 revolutions per minute and 135 Newton meters of torque, already at 3,500 revolutions per minute. This potential was enough to accelerate the 318-kilogram machine with the rider on board from 0 to 100 in 3.6 seconds and from 0 to 200 in 16 seconds. The claimed top speed was 220 kilometers per hour. For the first time, the OCR 1000 debuted before the general public in October 1974 at the Intermod exhibition in Cologne and caused a sensation. Van Veen simply stunned with the extravagance of the rotary engine, the design that many later imitated, and most importantly, the mind-blowing power of 100 horsepower. The Kawasaki Z, the most powerful production motorcycle then, had just 82 horsepower. The OCR 1000 looked like a perfect and futuristic motorcycle. It was beautiful, well-built, and powerful, but there were a number of problems. First of all, the motorcycle turned out to be very expensive. Yes, it was exclusive, but not every motorcycle enthusiast was ready to pay an amount equivalent to the cost of 2 BMW R90 bikes. Adjusted for inflation, its price today would be about $40,000. Secondly, the motorcycle turned out to be very heavy, 318 kilograms. That's a normal weight for some laid-back tourer, but not for a motorcycle with sporty ambitions. Thirdly, there were engine problems. The Commodore unit seemed promising initially, but ultimately it was another failure. The Citroën GSB rotor sedan was produced in a run of only 874 cars, and most of them were bought back by Citroën and destroyed. In order not to burden itself with supporting an unsuccessful model with spare parts, the company Commodore lasted a few more years and eventually went bankrupt in 1980. And this event will definitely have a negative impact on Henk van Veen's business. And finally, the motorcycle was a gas guzzler. It consumed 10 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers, and as you can imagine, that wasn't even in the most dynamic riding mode. Van Veen had grand plans to produce 2,000 motorcycles a year. For this purpose, he even built a special factory in the German town of Duderstadt, closer to the main sales region. Van Veen OCR 1000 began production 4 years after its debut at the Intermod exhibition. That is, in 1978 at that very factory in Germany. But Van Veen slightly overestimated the market. Still, the two-rotor OCR remained an expensive exclusive. That's why, over 4 years up to and including 1981, only 38 units of this motorcycle were produced. That's how many connoisseurs of the exotic were willing to part with a large sum, including, for example, the American newspaper magnate Malcolm Forbes and the co-owner of Opel and Zags, Gunther Zags. As you can see, the number of motorcycles produced was nowhere near the volumes that Henk had aimed for. By 1981, the production of the large rotary mastodon had become unprofitable and impractical. The tooling and stock of parts were bought from Henk van Veen by another Dutch rotary enthusiast, Ger van Rotselaar, who built the 39th OCR 1000 for his personal use. That's where things stalled, and the remaining parts gathered dust in the workshop for a long time until he decided to sell them. The next buyer was a restorer of classic cars and motorcycles, Andris Willing. He saw the many parts and exclaimed, "There are enough here for 10 more motorcycles," then resolved to assemble that many. In 2009, Willing and his partner Dirk Knipp registered the company OCR Motors and got to work. Their main goal was to create 10 absolutely authentic OCR 1000 EL. All the missing parts were ordered from the same companies that made parts for this motorcycle 30 years ago. The modern Michelin macadam tires are the sole design innovation, so the 10 units of one Win OCR 1000 produced in 2011-2012 are not replicas at all. It's more like a resumption of production 30 years later. OCR Motors offered a 2-year warranty on the motorcycle, but there were no plans to continue production after the 10th motorcycle was completed. The Rotary One Win began as an ambitious attempt to build the world's best superbike, a dream of an engineer with impressive specifications for its time. The motorcycle turned out to be an interesting experience. It showed great promise, but it was very expensive, and its engine suffered from the typical issues common to Wankel engines. The OCR 1000 ended up being a very rare and rather strange machine, doomed to obscurity. This brings my story to an end. As always, this was the CrossMoto channel with you. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and being active on the channel. Special thanks to everyone who supports the channel financially. See you next time.